How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
You are tuned in to the FowlWeather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
Now is the time, my friends, to check in on your wetlands. Growing season check-ins are critically important for intervention to make sure you have the most duck food possible. Water conditions have been challenging for many this year with flooding of woods and crops throughout the southeast and rains forcing late drawdowns in the upper Midwest and into the northeastern U.S. Now is the time for a growing season check-in for problem plants and infrastructure issues. You don't want to be out there when all your plants are brown down and you're waiting to put water on and you're like, oh shit, we missed that. So we focus on some updates from experts that are managing migration and wintering habitat across the country. All this week on the FowlWeather Podcast. Hey, my friends across Duck Country, USA. Wow, did we cover a lot of ground together this summer season in the 2025 Data Stream series. From how the BPOP and AHM work, to why banding waterfowl is so critically important, and how we use those data. And then on to how hunter surveys provide vital information on harvest metrics used by waterfowl scientists, conservation, and managers. The Data Stream series was an aim to get the good information into the hands and minds of duck hunters. So please do share those podcasts with your friends in the blind and at the coffee shop. We intersperse those episodes with the Young Waterfowl Professional series, which is also winding down as we get ramped up for another great duck season. So if you missed one or all of those great summer episodes, give them a whirl as the heat of summer hopefully wanes soon. As we've said, September, though, is the new August, so lots of time left in the growing season to make up for lost time from spring, cool weather, and early summer flooding. Listen in today to find out more from the experts. Also, remember to check out our Photographer of the Year. Lori Mickelman's work can be found and purchased at littlepeacegallery.com. As Lori calls her work, peaceful moments through nature's lens, sharing my love for birds and wildlife with other. Much of Lori's work is captured right down the road from the home office at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge, but Lori travels everywhere with her camera and captures truly amazing photos across the country and world. Again, check her work out at littlepeacegallery.com. The link is also on our webpage at fowlweather.co, and then click on the About button. Remember that this coming season, as a loyal listener of the FowlWeather Podcast, you are going to know where the ducks are at before the ducks know where they're at. We're very thankful for our every week listeners. You know who you are. Those that will never miss a single migration forecast episode each Monday morning. Y'all are as ate up as me about ducks, duck biology, and duck migration. Our dedicated weekly listeners can pick the best days to hunt because the FowlWeather Podcast forecasts fresh ducks hot from the north. Right? You know where the ducks are at before the ducks know where they're at. Shoot those ducks from the north before they know where they're at. Also, just a reminder as well to take a minute to rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. We appreciate your support very, very much. I'm your host, DrMike, coming to you from the home office in Jack's Reef. We are still on the hunt for our next duck dog. Our old boy, Dr. Zug, is fully retired at 11.5 years old, and baby Jaeger ain't much of a baby anymore at 8 years old, so it is time. I mean, Zug may get a pheasant or two, but it's probably going to be like, the ditch chicken method, driving around and seeing if we can find a released bird. Easy birds to put his old legs on. We usually don't do that, but we try to give the old dogs a little bit of a chance to flush a bird here or there late in their career. We also usually get a dog when our youngest is about 6 years old, but Jaeger was doing so well. She was such a beast in the marsh. We decided to let her rip for several more years. She's also only about 48 pounds, so holding it together a bit longer than those big dogs we've had in the past. We didn't want a puppy, though, to take away from Jaeger's great work in the marsh, pheasant fields, and grouse woods, so we kind of put it off a little bit. But now we aim to get a puppy, preferably a small female yellow lab, around May of next year. That gives me kind of the summer to spend time bonding. So the hunt is on for a dog from good hunting stock. And no judgment on others, but we work hard to find families breeding their dog. We really don't do kennels and shy away from anyone that breeds their dams more than twice. Just some sideboards of what my wife and I consider proper care for dogs overall. We want dogs that are family and come from folks that consider their dogs family as well. So we'll see what happens, not forcing it, but looking pretty hard right now. We would get a dog from Canada, but the CDC isn't letting dogs into the U.S. from Canada until they're 8 months old. Something about puppy mills and keeping disease out of the States and vice versa into Canada. I really hope that one would change around a little and they could find a way to do it. But we're not doing an 8-month started dog or anything like that. That's just our preference. We really like that bonding kind of puppy period. And summer with a puppy at the farm in Jack's Reef really makes for some positive, formative years for a pup, in our opinion. On the Jaeger liver disease front, we are in the same place. She remains asymptomatic, and the autoimmune drugs seem to be keeping her body from attacking her liver, which is a good thing. And her recent liver values are getting better as well. Her ALT values were only a few points high, so we are tracking in the right direction. We do know this, though, without that proper copper chelation, thyroid meds, and autoimmune treatment, she probably wouldn't be with us running around the farm right now, and we're really looking forward to another wonderful duck season with her at the helm. I also just got back from a wonderful trip on 2 site visits to Wisconsin with some dedicated stewards of the land. It's wild rice country, sandhill cranes calling overhead and feeding alongside local geese in freshly cut wheat fields, rows of corn, thick green, well tasseled out, marshes full of breeding birds, and great camaraderie at a classic small-town Wisconsin supper club was had. It couldn't have been better, and I'm looking forward to digging into the plant sampling data to provide insights on how to help these great folks have a marsh that pops, how to help them produce more food and more habitat for ducks and duck hunters. Up next, a check-in on wetland conditions from the upper Midwest to the Atlantic coast and into the MAV, so please stick with us. How many days have you had empty skies over the duck blind? Cameras full of deer except when you're there. Turkeys that just won't turkey right. Your property can be more with wildlife strategies. It is no secret that hiring a consultant, an expert in managing water, woods, and fields, an expert in duck foods and deer and turkey habitat, an expert in hunting pressure management. Well, it is no secret that hiring a consultant yields better habitat for the critters you chase. Less empty skies, more quality days afield, more smiles for miles with family and friends. If that's your game and goal, contact Ryan Delaney at ryan@farmlg.com for a site visit. And hey, here's the deal. I'm filled up for summer 2025 with clients up north, but if our northern friends have a property in need of some love, contact me at DrMike at FowlWeather.co for a summer 2026 site visit. All right, let's jump right in with the experts from the field. We meet with Ed Farley from Ducks Unlimited about the wetland conditions from Virginia to Georgia. Then John Simpson of Winus Point Shooting Club in Northwest Ohio and talk about upper Midwest conditions. And then we meet with Ryan Delaney of Wildlife Strategies about the MAV. First up today, we're going to meet with Ed Farley, who's the manager of conservation programs for the Southern Atlantic region with Ducks Unlimited. Ed, welcome to the FowlWeather Podcast.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
And for folks, Ed was a prior student of mine at SUNY ESF and worked in New York for quite a while, but he's a North Carolina native and has a good report for us on kind of wetland conditions throughout the growing season and what migrating and wintering birds might expect for the winter, kind of from Georgia up to North Carolina. And your part of the world, Ed, is mostly like where you grew up, is the Matamesquite region, kind of that northeast portion of North Carolina. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. Up around Hyde County, North Carolina, a lot of refuges, a lot of ducks.
Yeah, I went to the Wingby with a student who's collecting feather samples for her graduate project, and of course we look at all those envelopes. And Hyde County is kind of a famous place for ducks. A little background on that part of the world, and maybe wetland, kind of historic wetlands and wetland restoration in that part of the world that's gone on. Just a little note on that, if you got some time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, a lot of people don't realize it, but Hyde County, North Carolina, which is where Lake Mattamuskeet is the #1 county for duck harvest in the whole Atlantic Flyway. So it's kind of a very important spot for ducks. Lake Mattamuskeet is the largest natural lake in North Carolina. The average depth is around 2 feet. So really, that's a perfect depth for a lot of waterfowl. It's a very important wintering area for tundra swans. Now, unfortunately, the lake, traditionally was a submerged aquatic vegetation hotspot, and that's what brought a lot of the birds into the area. But in the last roughly 10 years, that SAV has tanked, and there's almost no SAV in the lake. And so a lot of the surrounding marshes and private lands are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for waterfowl currently, and a lot of refuge impoundments too, where they're doing some moist soil management and things like that, are helping to bridge that gap. And there's also a lot of other important coastal areas, like Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge has a lot of waterfowl. Up into the Currituck Sound, coastal North Carolina is a really historic area for waterfowl and waterfowl hunting, and it remains that way to this day. And I cover down up into Virginia and all the way down into Georgia, and basically the coastal areas from this in this region are just really important wintering and migration areas for a lot of different waterfowl species.
Yeah, and there's this really strong link from where we are at in Jack's Reef to that northeast North Carolina region, right? Like these ducks, our gadwall, our widgeon, our teal, our pintails end up in that part of the world and really rely on that habitat during winter. And y'all are way warmer than us. I mean, you don't get the snow, you don't get the ice. So that, we were talking a little bit before we got on here, and from Georgia up to you, the submerged aquatic vegetation really matters a lot, right? So we think a lot about this really kind of emergent vegetation that produces a ton of seeds and moist soil areas and then agricultural lands. But as these birds get down into that kind of brackish and the region where maybe it's a little freshwater further up impoundments, the submerged aquatic vegetation is something that a lot of these ducks can more so make a living on. And to hear that, Lake Mattamuskeet kind of lost that is a little heartbreaking. What is the reason? Is it a water quality problem over there, Ed?
Yes, it's a water quality reason. A lot of the inputs have, eventually hit the critical tipping point where it shifted to a not macrophytic vegetation dominated system and towards a algae driven system. And so that's really not good. The lake is split into two. There's a causeway that crosses the lake. Previously, the west, roughly half of the lake, that tanked first. The SAV died off on that side first. The east side maintained that SAV for longer. And I mean, as recently as, I'd have to look back at the records, but I think it was around 2010. I mean, there was over 300,000 waterfowl on the lake when they did the count. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of birds at one time. And that doesn't even count the birds that pass through during migration. And so since the SAV is tanked, those birds have started to disperse. They're in different areas or using different habitats. And so it's a sad thing that's happened, but there's a lot of partners, Fish and Wildlife Service and other partners are really working hard to try and counteract that and bring the lake back to what it once was.
Yeah, we've done okay. Like if you go further up, and you worked in the Chesapeake region previously, and that's a huge watershed. And we've done some very good work in improving the water quality and getting that SAV back there. So hopefully for Mattamuskeet, that can happen too. And I don't want to say that the Chesapeake's like a full-blown win, but it's better than where it was at one point. And
Certainly.
but in the East, I think that's the thing. Like, we're in the Finger Lakes region. You lived here for a while you went to school, and that's as clean of water as you get. The city of Syracuse pulls their water directly out of a lake, but we're getting harmful algal blooms from nutrient runoff from basically a very changed landscape. And I think in the East and elsewhere, Lake Erie, Western Lake Erie struggles with those harmful algal blooms and such too. And, we got a lot of work to do on that front to keep our water clean, for not just for ourselves, or I guess I could switch it around too, not just for the ducks, but for ourselves as well. And we got to work a lot harder, I think, to find ways to keep the runoff from going to these places and, hurting duck habitat and hurting clean water for people too.
Definitely. I mean, and that's one of the side effects too of the loss of roughly 50% of the wetlands in a lot of these states is a lot of those wetlands were at one point in time helping to filter that runoff before it got to these larger bodies of water. So once you start losing those wetlands, that filtration is much diminished. And so when you start increasing the inputs, it's only going to have negative outcomes.
Yeah, and as I've always said, I teach this in my ornithology class. You probably heard it from me as a student in the courses you took with me is, as go the birds, as go people, right? Our lives are inextricably linked. And once we realize that and we take care of the critters, we also take care of ourselves at the same time. But anyhow, not to get too philosophical and deep this afternoon, let's dive into kind of like what the season's been from Georgia up to North Carolina as far as weather, and what that's done for just I'll put quotes around natural, because I think that's like a loaded word, right? But like the emergent wetlands, the SAV, all that stuff, the moist soil, and then kind of like the crop stuff that people plant for ducks. Like, where are we weather-wise? Was it like a cold year? Was it a warm year? Good growing, bad growing, humid, dry, etc.? Like, where do we sit right now, Ed?
Yeah, it's kind of been all of the above. It was, at least in my neck of the woods in eastern North Carolina, it was kind of a late, very wet spring, which delayed some of the people dewatering impoundments, which is not necessarily a bad thing from the moist soil standpoint, but for those people planting crops for wildlife, that definitely put them behind the eight ball, put them behind. But again, it dried out soon enough where a lot of those places got their crops in plenty of time, and things are shaping up pretty good. It's just been a really spotty summer. One of the through lines is it's been really hot. Like, it's just been scorcher. Seems like the whole spring and summer, from turkey season on, it's just felt like it's been abnormally warm. And then with the precipitation, it's just been extremely isolated, where you'll have one area will get 3 inches of rain, and then just down the road they'll get half an inch. And so it's there's it's hard to draw any through lines about that, especially because that has such a strong impact to these systems. But I was down in Georgia a couple of weeks ago, and some of the DNR managed WMAs down there had some really strong looking impoundments. Their moist soil management is looking spot on. I think they'll have a really good response from the birds. And then up into South Carolina, a lot of those SAV impoundments that I've been out to see, they've gotten really good SAV growth. And so as they start adding the water to start increasing the biomass of it, it's shaping up to be pretty good there. And then into North Carolina, it's similar. I was out yesterday on an impoundment, and it was a Wildlife Resource Commission impoundment, and they're doing a great job managing it. It looks like they'll have some really good annual plants in that unit, and some of the refuge impoundments that I've seen have also had really good growth. So in spite of the weather chaos, things are shaping up to be pretty good. It just, down in this neck of the woods, it's so weather driven. Once the birds get down here, whether or not they'll be moving around or what they'll be eating. So I think right now the table's set pretty good for a hunting season to be as good as the weather will allow it.
It's summer. Time to enjoy long days, lazy nights, and zero cooking. Because Uber Eats has deals all summer long. So when hunger strikes, don't sweat it. Delicious deals are just a tap away on Uber Eats. Enjoy all your favorite food delivered straight to you. Get Burger King, Subway, Popeyes, and hundreds more local favorites and savor every last bite. Now that sounds like a good summer. Order now on Uber Eats. Terms apply. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Yeah, and that's a nice comment. I mean, you can set the table all you want, but if you don't get a winner, then you lots of times don't get those birds, right? You've been up here in New York, and heck, 2 years ago, you'd already moved out of here, but we had like pintails that were on the refuge all winter long in central New York, which seems just wild, right? Like not on the lake, but like on the refuge. So if they don't get down to you, or even if they get to you and then you don't get the weather to push them around, it kind of makes it tough. But it sounds like kind of similar to here that we ran into at the farm with food plots, as I had a hard time getting stuff in. Everything was, from I think last week till now, I went out to Wisconsin, did a couple site visits with folks for wetland management stuff, and came back, and our corn had all tasseled out in like 3 days, right? Like the heat and humidity. But I tell you, I planted most stuff almost like 3 weeks later than I wanted to. And, it was probably more towards like the long-term normal, or maybe just a little bit later, but it felt like super late because we'd had so many really early springs. But the humidity and the heat, like we've been 92, 95, 97 up here, with 152% humidity is what it feels like. Like it feels like you're walking around in rain mostly. And the plants have really caught up at this point. So my sense is that's kind of what's happened up and down the East Coast in general this year. And either, again, same spotty thing. Like we got thunderstorms where you've got some spots that have too much rain, and then you got spots that are dry. So I think kind of like the East Coast in general has been a lot of that. So those folks that are looking for hunting spots and thinking about next year, it's going to be, even within an hour drive or two, it's completely different, I think, up and down the East Coast. So I don't know if that kind of is a summary of your feel of things, Ed.
Yeah, definitely. That does a pretty good job of getting it. I mean, my family's got an impoundment, and it's been, there's times when we've had to pump to keep it dry enough for the crops not to get flooded out, but we've got some good moist soil growth and spots in there. And so, it's shaping up where that one's looking good. But just down the road, some people are fighting. It's so wet that they can't even keep it dry. And other places not too far from us, it's been too dry. So
yeah, but I think the ducks will be good, because if you got dry spots, you're able to grow, and then you should be able to put water on it, like, late November, December, January for the birds. And then if you got other spots that are wet, well, at least you got water, right? Like we've had years where water's a problem. And so I don't feel like, this year to a large degree is going to be that issue. I think one of the things we ran into is we probably had a little less moist soil than we'd like, because we just stayed too wet too late to get the water off. But again, having water for waterfowl is better than not having water at all. So
yeah, I mean, and there's always the caveat for us too down here that if one big tropical system comes in, it could change the whole landscape, before the season comes through. So that's another thing to always keep in mind, that's always a possibility in our neck of the woods.
Yeah, and we run into that too. Like the peak of the hurricane season is September, right? Late August, September, and we're not there yet. And I don't want to wish for hurricanes itself, but that's also tropical systems that really do inundate places, all the way through the Gulf states and up through. You can get these systems that run up through Ohio and then over to us. They come along the Atlantic coast, and those are very often a blessing in a dry year. So it's kind of a crapshoot every year for the ducks on the breeding areas as well as on the wintering areas. And heck, when those things align really well and we've got water, appropriate water everywhere, and food and the right conditions for them, then they do really well. So I think I like the note that table set, especially considering, breeding populations in the kind of prairie pothole region now don't look good, and y'all get birds out of that to Georgia, South Carolina. I think the East is kind of like New York, Maryland, Delaware, down to through Virginia, North Carolina, and then it kind of truncates. But a lot of the birds in the places further south, like South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, along the Atlantic coast, kind of come from a little farther west sometimes. So those two things might be a little bit, different this year, because I think the Eastern population breeding conditions were pretty good in general. If anything, we were too wet. Too wet. So it can get too wet for a mallard in the East and such, right? So when the nests they get a little stinky, predators can find them, and they get a little wet. Eggs don't hatch well when they're really wet, but I think overall we're in a good spot. So thanks, Ed. I really appreciate you being on, given that kind of local perspective, and I really like the idea of talking about that submerged aquatic vegetation, because I don't think we think about it enough. We got a lot of these ducks we like to pursue, like widgeon, gadwall, that really go after that, and then the invertebrate basin that for a lot of the other species, they kind of start smashing those things late in the season. And there's a lot going on in that submerged aquatic vegetation that I think kind of discount as hunters that just think it has to be like a flooded ag field, or it has to be moist soil or something, right?
I'll tell you that one of the best hunts I've ever been on for widgeon and gadwall was in a submerged aquatic vegetation impoundment, and it was eye-opening to say the least.
Yeah, there's a lot of food there. And so it's coontail, milfoil. Do you get wild celery? What else do you get?
Mostly in this one, it was widgeon grass.
Widgeon grass, okay.
Grass is what a lot of these impoundments are targeting. And yeah, on that hunt in particular, they never even left. They just lift up pretty high and then they start filtering back down. But some places will also introduce, have some naiad in there. That's one of the things that some people will manage for, like old catfish ponds. That's they can do a mix of moist soil in some and SAV in the others, and a lot of times that'll be naiad, or if they can get it, widgeon grass. And wild celery is always the gold standard, but doesn't always work in a lot of places because of salinity and other things.
Yeah, it's tough. It doesn't like turbidity, right? If you get any carp or changes in salinity, wild celery's a little finicky to some degree, right? So yeah, we run into that a lot with landowners. They're like, where'd our wild celery go? I'm like, well, it's a turbidity and water quality issue. So keep after that, wetland restoration that, keeps that water clean, running to places downstream, and you're going to have ducks, right?
That's for sure.
All right, Ed, you keep up the good work. Appreciate you jumping on with us quick, and good luck this duck season. And, one of these days I'm going to wander down your way in January and have a shoot with you. So
put in for a swan tag.
Yeah. I will. I promise someday that I'm going to do that. I always get kind of behind the eight ball and then never get there time-wise, but we'll get there. So appreciate you and appreciate everything you're doing, Ed, for the Ducks. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike.
All right, up next, after we just finished up with the Mid-Atlantic region on wetland conditions for the East Coast, we're moving over to the upper Midwest and Northwest Ohio with John Simpson, who is the executive director of the Winus Point Shooting Club and Winus Point Marsh Conservancy. And we've had John on before for a kitchen conversation. If you go back, you can find that episode 2 falls ago, I think, John, at this point.
I think it was years ago, yep.
Yeah, we didn't get out to see you last year. We were trying to, and then you all got froze out in December, I think, and we never made it over there because it was kind of locked up.
That's right. Stuff froze a little early on us last year, and it took a long time to loosen up, so we had to cancel a lot of plans.
Yeah, it was a real year though, at least. It wasn't like the year before, which was the winter that never happened. The cold came early enough, I think, and you kind of have a love-hate relationship with that cold though up there, because if you stay open, then you've got hunters right through to the end, and if it locks up, you get a little shorter season, right?
Yep, yeah, for sure. I hate to lose opportunity, and I hate telling my members that there's nothing to be had. Last year was actually the first time in my entire career that I called members up and canceled plans because we literally had nothing. It was completely frozen.
Yeah, and probably actually got some ice fishing and stuff like that in around y'all. We had a better year. Our listeners know that. But we're in the heat of summer here. We're in the humidity. We just got, actually today's like 65 with a really nice long light rain that all our crops have needed. But we're here to visit with you about the heat and humidity that we have now, but just in general, what your growing season has looked like. And, maybe we're kind of doing this as like a wetland check-in with the experts this week, and how the season started out for y'all, and then kind of where it ended up, and what you've been able to do and what you haven't been able to do for growing food for ducks.
Sure, yeah. Well, the spring started off, May and into June started off probably cooler and windier than normal for us. And precipitation or water conditions, I would say, was about average, or maybe trending a little bit towards the dry side for a while. But things really changed around in July. The heat and humidity and a lot of rain hit us in July. And that's really, having all that rain in July has really changed a lot of planting plans, especially for the duck clubs around here.
Yeah, and your guys' duck clubs, like you guys are a little unique at Winus Point, where you don't really plant many crops. You do a little bit of annual stuff like buckwheat for teal. And what else do you do? You said you mentioned some other stuff. Do you do like, I don't know, sorghum or anything like that? Or what's the other annuals that you do?
So our place, so we have about 3,000 acres of diked wetlands on our place. And we manage the vast majority of that as natural moist soil or natural wetlands, some of which is moist soil and some of which is deeper water emergent wetlands. But we also do some planting of annuals. So each year we'll put in maybe 100 acres of Japanese millet, and then we'll do for big duck season we'll do a mix of we put in a few basically food plots of buckwheat and some other millets, brown top millet and proso millet and soybeans.
Oh, I got you. You do a little bit of soybeans too. So
we picked a great year to start experimenting with soybeans this year.
I had a field last year. I shot 5 times that was flooded soybeans that were not able to be harvested, and it was substantial. And in the spring, the pintails absolutely smashed it in the spring. So in our part of the world, I feel like if you flood that stuff a little late, it's, higher carbohydrate. You got to let it kind of really brown down and get dry, and then even if it freezes, the ducks will walk around on the ice a little bit and pick it. But it seems like they couldn't clean it out before it froze up, and then there was just tons of it left in the spring. So I was kind of a fan. I think if you dial it in right, it can work, and you don't have to flood it as deep, right? It's not like corn that you got to get stuff to the ears, or plant short corn, right? That is stubbier, or plant corn that lodges on purpose and falls over. Those are the fun ones. But you guys don't do a lot of that. You're mostly that emergent marsh and moist soil kind of rotation, right?
Yeah, we're mostly rotating emergent marsh and moist soil by far. That's mostly what we do. Our planting of annuals is probably under, or always under 150 acres, if not under 100 acres every year. So we just do some little food plots to help with attractiveness in certain areas.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's kind of something maybe to keep the members that want that type of thing happy, but not go to the full-blown sea of corn that is around you. And we could talk about that all day. I might have you back on because we're doing a corn episode again. We're calling it the Corn Episode Redux because the idea of flooded corn has kind of reared its ugly head as a contentious issue nowadays for folks down south. But we'll stay off that for the most part, other than your neighbors plant a lot of it. But how was that in general this year? I mean, a peak of kind of, emergence and growing for corn to get it up above knee high, is that, and above knee high and beyond and start to tassel is kind of that July period. So what happened with y'all for that kind of, those folks that were planting corn this year?
Yeah, so a lot of we have thousands of acres of flooded corn around us, and a lot of those clubs got that corn in just before the wet weather arrived in let's say late June. And so when the wet weather got here, it flooded out a bunch of corn on many of the clubs, and they replanted with shorter growing season corn in places. But then again, that was pretty wet after that, and so that crop didn't do great either. So a lot of our neighboring clubs have corn in. There's big areas that were flooded out. There is some corn that's doing well, in the drier areas. So it's going to be as far as flooded corn goes, it's going to be a real hit or miss in our region this year.
Yeah, for sure. And you guys were the opposite of us. Like in July, we were cold and wet, just like you all were in May, and then June was still pretty wet. I didn't even turn sprinklers on in the garden or anything, and then July just went bone dry. Like we've had long stretches. We got an inch maybe a week ago, and it just disappeared. And so we've been really dry, which is good because for our moist soil stuff, we sometimes have a hard time getting water off. And, we can get water off by mid-July and actually still produce weeds that produce seeds to feed ducks. But it's been a tough year. I got to go over to our federal state land where we do a bunch of research with collaborators and stuff and see how those units are looking this year. But they're behind schedule. Is your sense that, your moist soil is behind schedule, but maybe the humidity and heat is helping it catch up?
I'm a little concerned our moist soil is actually ahead of schedule. We struggled a little bit because we do some of our moist soil drawdowns a little later in the spring. And so we were starting to work on those drawdowns really hard when it kind of got wet. So we struggled to get the water off, but once the water was off, this heat and humidity and then this constant, it's been raining twice a week, all July. And that just kept that ground wet, and our moist soil's booming right now. We've got some tremendous stands of moist soil.
So when you say it's almost too ahead of schedule, is that like what does that do to you? Does it just make it a little too more robust than you want, and then you gotta work with it to get it knocked down a little bit? Because like super robust moist soil, that's like when you walk through it is above your head. You put water on it, the ducks just don't get to it. Is that a case where you're at? Like what makes it ahead of schedule that's maybe problematic?
Yep, that's exactly where we're at. It is, I guess two things. First of all, the heat and humidity is really making that moist soil kind of advance in its development. So some of the seed heads are pretty mature for this time of year already. But then you hit on the other big one, and that is it just grows so tall and so thick that, when the growing conditions are like this, that when we go to flood it in the fall, the ducks literally, they won't be able to utilize it because they won't be able to get in there. And so we're hoping that, mid to late August, we're hoping that ground is finally going to be dry enough that we can get in there and mow some openings and knock some down and kind of make it, make that habitat so that ducks can access it and utilize it a little better.
Yeah, and we covered this in some of the wetland management stuff that we did last spring. And, a lot of folks either crimp or roll. I mean, you can call it either one, right? It's kind of the same. Crimping tends to be the ag kind of term, and rolling tends to be like the management term. They're the same thing, just knocking it down. And then some people mow it, but, you do like 50% of it in kind of a very windy fashion. So it kind of looks like natural marsh, and then you put water back on it. So I'm kind of a fan of the whole kind of crimping thing, because if it's still green and you do that, then it's still, some of that stuff can poke a head above the water when you start putting water on it and still kind of finish that seed head. And I think from an invertebrate perspective, it might harbor, more inverts, but mowing is a way to do it. In our part, like people in the South are like, what do you mean you're worried about mowing it? Well, it's still, so our stuff is still green when you want to put water on it sometimes. It hasn't fully shut down at shatter stage. So, but my guess is the rest of that unit, John, the 50% or maybe 75% or whatever that you don't mow down is probably the energy per per acre is probably off the charts anyway in those moist soil areas.
Sure.
So
Yep.
losing it a little for attractiveness is not a big deal, right?
Yeah, and if conditions are dry enough, a pretty common practice around here, and something that we utilize is we'll actually start mowing our Japanese millet or our natural moist soil. We'll actually start mowing it early when it's just in the growing stage before it ever puts a seed head on. And it's kind of like cutting your grass. It forces it to be short, but once you stop mowing at the right time of year, it'll still throw a seed head. And so we'll do that. We'll mow areas just to keep it short and then quit, let it put its seed on, and then when we flood it, it's the height we want.
Yeah, that's interesting. Most folks don't have that capacity or time. So, but when I've been in this situation where the base under the moist soil is so squishy that getting equipment on it is a bear. Do you guys ever use I'm guessing maybe ATVs or tracked vehicles instead of large equipment, or is it just too big of an area to do that?
Yeah, so our ground around here is the lowest lying, deepest water marshes that are in the area. And so there's a lot of places, like you say, that we can't even get a tractor into. So we'll use ATVs, little like the old Honda ATVs, the little 300s that are really light. We'll use those with a sprayer on the back to spray in shooting holes, or we'll actually pull a little lawn roller, one of the water-filled lawn rollers. We'll pull that behind to tramp down trails and shooting holes, because that's really the only thing we can get out into some of our properties.
Yeah, and when we do consultation on private lands kind of throughout, we're doing work from Wisconsin over to New York right now, and is like a part of the podcast, the habitat stuff. And I always tell people, like, it's all about adapting to conditions. Like, well, can I do this? Can I do that? I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's going to depend on the year and the weather, right? Yep. There's so much of this duck stuff, from growing food to the migration to how your hunting is, that is so tied to weather. What problem areas do you have beyond like it being a little bit wet? Do you have problem plants creeping in? I was in Wisconsin, and the one wetland it looked like, this was just 2 days ago, wild rice was getting replaced by flowering rush. Have you run into flowering rush in your marshes? And then what other problem plants are you dealing with this year?
Yeah, so we've got a list of problem plants that we deal with. Phragmites is kind of, well, it's not really number one, but it's probably the most widespread. So we have Phragmites. Flowering rush is a big problem on our place, especially in our moist soil wetlands, and especially in our wetlands that we draw down frequently. We have one marsh in particular that we draw down almost every year and to plant Japanese millet. And we've really lost a lot of our natural moist soil seed bank from those frequent drawdowns, and instead we just get a real good crop of flowering rush in there. And it is a tough plant to control with herbicides.
Yeah, and if folks aren't familiar with it, I'd say this is an emerging one for a lot of people. One of our other new ones is water chestnut over here, and we have it in our marshes. John, I hope you guys don't get it. It is a bear to deal with. And, it seems like every other year we've got a new one kind of showing up. So I think it's funny to think purple loosestrife used to be the thing, right? Then it was frag, and I feel like we're getting there with frag. There's a moth in a larval stage that Ontario released, and I think you guys it's gonna just show up there. It's a moth, right? Like, I think it's gonna come in from Canada before the EPA even approves it for use. But it seems like even when you think you're ahead on one of them, just another one shows up. Do you think that the tubers from flowering rush sustain themselves in the mud enough that do you think ducks are eating this stuff?
I don't have any anecdotal evidence to support them eating it. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I know all those little tubers, nodules, or whatever. I don't know the plant term for what they are, but I know that they really persist, and you can dry marshes out, and you can disc marshes, and those little nodules really persist and come back, as well as the seed bank. Even when we control flowering rush with herbicide, like we sprayed a bunch months ago, those areas are already green with seed bank that's resprouting already.
Yeah, it's a tough one because, I mean, you disc it and all you do is chop up all those. It's like taking potatoes and throwing them in the soil, like chopping potatoes up, throwing them in the soil. They grow all new plants, right? So,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
I don't know. I kind of want to
chop
figure.
into pieces, just each piece, right?
Yeah, they just chop up and spread. I kind of want to figure out if ducks at least eat it because I'm on that like, yeah, we should probably deal with this thing. But in the meantime, if ducks are eating it, I like the pause because that's where I'm at. Right when landowners ask me, I'm like, I think we're on the front edge of this and we got to figure it out. And like purple loosestrife is actually great for pollinators. And at the level now that it exists in marshes, it doesn't take things over. But I think in the short term, the concern with flowering rush is that it reduces plant diversity. And that's what's going on with all these kind of invasive plants. So,
Yeah, and the big problem I see, at least from a duck club management standpoint, the big problem with flowering rush is that it's really invasive, like in our prime duck areas, the prime areas they're utilizing. So it's growing in our moist soil areas, it's growing in those shallow water sort of loafing areas that the ducks want to use in the fall. It grows right where the hunters want to be. It's not like Phragmites, which generally is growing, on higher ground, or Eurasian water milfoil that's growing out in the deeper ground. That flowering rush really takes over those prime areas for getting ducks and hunters together.
yeah, the one club I was at, we stopped at one of the blinds and, I hopped out of the boat with waders on and was mucking around looking at SAV and ID and plants and trying to see everything they had in there. And there was a big patch of flowering rush right in front of the blind. And it was kind of this just mucky, very loose, organic kind of stuff that's in a lot of these marshes, right? Like you get, you're up to your knees or thigh and there's 3 inches of clear water, the rest of it's muck. And then you're standing on good hard bottom at some point, sand or, whatever's down there, clay. But the flowering rush is literally just living in that like muck slurry. Like you just grab a plant and it's just floating around and doing just fine. And then it can grow out of like almost hard soil that's completely dry and moist soil. So the adaptability of the plant is really cool. And like that's kind of the way I look at it with some of these plants is everybody like, hates them, has a lot of hate on them. Like, man, this plant's kicking ass, right? Like, and has a neat life history strategy. We just got to figure out how to get rid of it. So I think that's kind of a wrap. What do you think as far as, 1 to 10, you think for plant growth in the upper Midwest? And I think like Wisconsin's been wet. Minnesota's been crazy wet. It's been, and then there's spotty weird stuff in Ontario that had long periods of drought. But I think your experience is kind of pretty similar to a lot of folks this year in the upper Midwest. So what's your thoughts on just going into the duck season food-wise, from a 1 being the worst and a 10 being the best? Where do you think we're kind of hanging on right now?
I tend to always be optimistic about upcoming duck seasons, but things seem to be setting themselves up pretty good right now.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think you're better off with water than without. And as I've said, a lot of ducks in our part of the world, they're juveniles. They don't even know what the hell a seed is until later in the season. So the water, the SAV, the bugs seem to be a thing they really key on early. And you guys at Winus Point are definitely giving ducks that as compared to that. I think that sea of corn that serves a purpose, but not in totality for all ducks all the time. So really appreciate what y'all are doing at Winus Point to keep that natural marsh along Lake Erie and keep doing the good work, John. Really appreciate everything that you do as a club and kind of for the ducks across, you're kind of a crossroads of the Mississippi and Atlantic Flyway. So I think you guys are really important to a lot of us across duck country USA. So appreciate that and appreciate you being on.
Thanks so much. Always nice to chat with you.
Beckman Game Calls has it dialed in. If you want a duck call that is adjustable to your air pressure and sounds like a duck, this is it. I've blown a ton of different calls in my life, but this one is the real deal. Look, we don't endorse just anything. We are only going to put forward a call that works. The Edison by Chris Beckman of Beckman Game Calls, yeah, this beauty sounds like a duck. I only know of one published research paper focused on what makes a duck call sound like a duck. Go look me up and you will see that colleagues and I have the only paper published in scientific literature about what makes a duck call sound like a duck. For sure, Chris Beckman did his homework, and this call sounds like a duck. This guy knows how to make a duck call, period. But don't just take my word for it. Here's the proof. First, a hen recording, and then the Edison in the big woods of Arkansas. Visit them today at BeckmanGameCalls.com.
Walmart Business is in the business of helping your business, regardless of whether you're building bridges, building spreadsheets, or building lesson plans. Ooh, that looks fun. Walmart Business can help save you time, money, and hassle so you can focus on what you're building instead of what your supply closet is missing. In short, we take care of business, so you can do more with yours. We're the Walmart you love, now for your business. Learn more at business.walmart.com.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtual Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your virtual pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
All right, up next, and I guess last today, we've got Ryan Delaney from Wildlife Strategies, which y'all hear a lot about on the podcast from his business and work in kind of the southeast region, and specifically kind of the Mississippi alluvial valley. So Ryan's on the road, took some time today away from his busy schedule to meet with us by phone. So appreciate you being here, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dr. Mike, and looking forward to digging in and kind of talking shop on habitat.
Yeah, and so earlier here in the episode, we covered kind of the mid-Atlantic, it's mid-Atlantic down to Georgia, so, mid to South Atlantic coast kind of region, Virginia down to Georgia. And then we went over to the upper Midwest, and we had a lot of discussion about, a late spring, cold, wet, and then a little bit of differences in precipitation, which really affected kind of crop planting and moist soil. This is really about, making sure we got places for ducks to stop and ducks to feed during winter, places to stop both north and south, and then places to spend the winter. So what's the take on your part of the world? I guess Memphis south, as far south as y'all go, Arkansas, Mississippi, and kind of Tennessee region. What was the setup for the season, and how's the growing season going for producing food for ducks?
Yeah, okay. So, the Missouri boot heel down to kind of central Mississippi Delta could probably be lumped together this year, just very similar conditions. Same constraints, same challenges from top to bottom in terms of weather and kind of some variability and flooding that we didn't expect to see continue on into the spring. I guess the big thing that we're noticing is some lack of acreages in the cropland. We don't have as much crop out there as we have in years past, and there's a lot of prevented planting acres that's very noticeable, not in rice or soybeans this year. So that could play a hand in kind of how this fall plays out with food availability and maybe some wetland complexes that are effectively deserts in a normal crop year maybe will provide a little something unexpected for this year. And I would say that in general, everybody experienced really, really wet start to the spring and then didn't get any relief. And that's what led to our preventive planning. And on the hunting club side and the managed wetland side, we always have to plan for our sites being wet long time, right? They're wetlands. We've had water on them for many months in order to harbor waterfowl. And so it's not unexpected, but it puts our work season kind of in a compressed stretch. Time is just going to be a lot more. Got to get it right the first time is the best way to describe management in a compressed season. So that's kind of what we're experiencing currently. I will say it's a great time to be on the phone and discussing habitat. most of eastern Arkansas received rainfall last night. That's going to set up August for us really, really well on our food plot stuff, and it'll likely tie off some irrigation for many of the farmers in the area. And we're looking towards harvest now, and getting some crops out of the field. Meanwhile, we're still plugging away on wetland impoundments, trying to get the table set. Moist soil responses were a little different this year with prolonged flooding and wet cycles, but we're managing in that space the best we can.
Well, one of the things I got a whole bunch. Not a whole bunch, like 4, 5, 6. I think I think total 6 that were like really solid questions about, hey, our club couldn't get crops in. And a lot of this was like southeast stuff where the rains kept coming and coming. And it was like, there was almost like that dry out period where you felt like you could plant and then you just got nailed again. And so there were a lot of washouts. There were a lot of washouts. And I got guys that are like, I had 3 of them that were like, but we got barnyard grass already coming up. And I'm like, they're like, what should we do? And my comment was, don't force it, right? Let this stuff be what it wants to be.
Yeah.
Produce that moist soil. Heck, you know how to identify barnyard grass. There is a book out there that colleagues and I produced. You have it. A bunch of landowners have it now. We gain no money from that. It's not a podcast thing. It's from way back when I worked at Mississippi State. All the money goes to the endowed chair at Mississippi State University to train students. And it's a guide to the moist soil plants of the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. And pick that up. And if you're in a situation where you're running into, I can't plant crops, it's coming up in weeds, then figure out what your weeds are. And a lot of them are as valuable, if not more valuable, at times than crops to these ducks. So I told folks, like, have at it and learn how to do the moist soil this year. Like when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And I'd tell you, moist soil lemonade's pretty effing sweet most years.
It's pretty effective.
Yeah.
It's very effective. And what you just described is what I'm dealing with a lot of landowners that had expectations of maybe having some hot crop plantings in and around their property. And now we're on a contingency plan. And the contingency plan is a great plan still, if we haven't made some mistakes getting there, like, using residual herbicides or kind of being too intensive trying to force the issue. And I think you made a good point. Don't force the issue. Work with what you've got. We had a lot of barnyard grass and even some Chihuahua millet that's volunteer that kind of got an early start this year. Just, maybe drawdowns didn't happen as quickly or as long as they needed to, but we got really good early responses. Well, we're mowing a lot of that stuff now and flushing it during dry periods if we can irrigate it, and sometimes doing some soil amendments, some fertilizer, just trying to get those early successional grasses established, beef them up, put a bunch of seed on the ground, get a bunch of seeds starting to germinate, and go in the second round with this stuff leading up into the fall. And I think that's a really effective way to set yourself up for a following year. Those types of management practices, mowing and irrigating and rolling, midsummer, do really, really, really good things for, plant succession in later years. And so, managing status quo of moist soil is really important so that you have consistency year to year if weather throws you curveballs.
Yeah, and I think in these low-lying spots, right, weather's going to throw you curveballs all the time. So I think you got to be ready for that. I like that kind of and I want to get the read on this correct, Ryan, is that, if you can't get a crop in this year and you're letting it do moist soil stuff, you're kind of prepping for next year from a nutrient standpoint, because you're going to have a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus capture in those plants, and then till them into that. And then that's going to provide some of the nutrition for your next year if you plant. Am I kind of reading that right? Like
we're trying to maintain a condition, a vegetation condition that is easier to manage, doesn't require as much herbicide, doesn't require as much manipulation to provide good responses on a year-to-year basis. And those are, your aggressive annual plants. And so that's where we're in a maintenance schedule to kind of keep that as our dominant vegetative cover. And and we use this opportunity to set the stage for next year with soil fertility. But I want to also bring up a point that's really, really just great about this moist soil response that happens this time of year. If you can roll with it and maintain a decent amount of duck energy days produced from a moist soil response, you've got this tool, which is mowing, rolling, manipulation, that's the kicker for a lot of successful hunting days. Exposing mud flats and being able to manipulate vegetation all throughout the fall and into hunting season is a super, super good strategy for harvesting more ducks.
Yeah, I love that. And you guys, I mean, one of the things we run into, and I talked to some folks about this recently here, is that we run into a situation where our moist soil is still super green when ducks want to show up. It actually hasn't browned down. It's not at shatter stage. Y'all never really run into that. Like, you can still, before the ducks get there, it's dry. You can get into units. You can roll it, crimp it. I feel like crimping's a term for ag and rolling is a term for moist soil, but they're universal, right? That's basically what you're doing is knocking that stuff down. Sometimes you overseed it if it's a deer food plot or whatever with crimping, but the idea is to roll or crimp 50% of that stuff, then put water on it. And you guys have brown vegetation, so you can mow it where we have to crimp it, because if we mow it, we're actually sacrificing that year's seed production of that moist soil. And so there's like a north to south difference, total difference, right? And so if we crimp it, roll it, whatever, it can still, hold a seed head up here and there, but it enables when the water goes on to create that 50-50, vegetated to open marsh area when you put the water on that looks more, looks natural to a duck, allows them to land in it and then feed. Again, your part of the world, you can mow it. We tend to not be able to do that unless you do it really late. And if it's late, man, by that point, if you start putting water on it, you're behind schedule. So one of the things I found very fun about this discussion, Ryan, and we're in it kind of now, is that from north to south, a lot of this moist soil stuff kind of came like Illinois, Missouri, and south. But the stuff we do up here in the north, and we've got plenty of opportunity to produce these moist soil plants and seeds to ducks, but it's a different equation. And a lot of the schedules that are shown in classic literature and that you apply don't apply to us. So it's all this stuff's adaptable on an annual basis, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I love the variability in management tactics as you go across this country and you see how growing season drives, our game plan, our sequencing of activities. It's fascinating stuff. And it's one of the reasons why you should get technical guidance. Somebody with experience in it can actually help you not make the mistakes of ruining a really, really great response in a wetland community and can kind of set you up for success. Maybe in a manner that takes a lot of labor and expense off of your plate.
Yeah, and this isn't a dig, but like I did some site visits in Wisconsin recently. Great landowners, they don't know their plants. And that's kind of typical, right? And I try, like, once you get that technical assistance, I can teach you your plants and how they respond to different things at different times. That's super, super helpful. But like, the one dude I worked with dealt with major construction companies, moving earth, excavators, big dozers and stuff like that. Like, that's what the guy does. He doesn't do plants like you and I do, right? So we each have our niche. And, what's fun about this is giving these folks this expertise to kind of help them along and meet their objectives of, sitting in the blind, seeing ducks, having food that the ducks are attracted to, harvesting more ducks and stuff like that. But the thing that I always see that happens too, you said you used the word curveballs. So was it 2 years ago was the super dry stuff? And I think we're almost not polar opposite of that, but pretty close. So talk about, like, real quick here, the challenges in the dry year compared to the challenges in the wet year, and maybe which one of those you feel is a better hand to be dealt.
Oh, it's 100% the wet cycle. I'd much rather take the wet cycle. I mean, the challenges of a wet cycle are, like I said, a compressed work season, just because you've got some hard deadlines. Once you get equipment in the field and can do management activities, the clock's ticking, fall's imminent. The wet cycles, you can work within them, though, and get consistency out of them. The biggest challenge with wet cycles is in some of the lowest systems, right? The bottomland hardwoods that we care so much about in the MAV. That's not a huge component of what's left on the landscape, but from a duck's perspective, it's really critical. And those areas are struggling right now. That's been a challenge to salvage what we can out of drainage. That meaning just getting what we can off with the expectation we're not going to get it all off this year. And certainly if hurricane season provides us with rainfall, we'll be in the situation where we've had, a lot of water in these bottoms for a long stretch. I'll say that with this on the other side, all the prevented planting acres this year is probably going to provide quite a bit of grasses and early successional plant species on the ag landscape. And those are going to be in our lowest lying, most difficult to farm areas. And so I encourage folks that have leases and or property owners, you got to start having discussions with your farmer in June and July of, hey, what can we get to salvage this season? And can we make this a positive? And, for some of my landowners, we've had to do a lot of that. We've had to just flex into saying, we're not getting rice crop in, which means we're not going to have, post-harvest practices in the traditional sense. But let's go ahead and set ourselves up for next year, and let's grow some really good duck groceries for now. I want to stress the importance of selecting management strategies to be consistent. Consistency is really, really, really important. And we have to be able to get responses that are going to give us consistency throughout the years for these ducks to imprint. And that's what we're looking to do with our techniques and our strategies, is every year provide what's necessary for ducks to spend the winters here and get back healthy.
Yeah, and I love that. So that comment isn't just about killing ducks. It's about imprinting ducks to make sure that you're seeing ducks, which we know is a metric which leads to hunter satisfaction and duck hunters coming back, and ultimately sending ducks back strong with good foods. That includes kind of holding some of that water late. I mean, I think we're in a way early time maybe to talk about that, but folks should start thinking about, how can I hold water for a little extended period and then still kind of do the things on the landscape that I want to do. And that varies by where you're at, for sure. But holding that water a little later maybe than what you want, not pulling boards immediately after season, getting those ducks to imprint in the spring, making them think about your property as they start to come south is probably, I don't think we've got the science behind that, Ryan, but I feel like there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that says if you treat these ducks well, you give them enough sanctuary in the winter, and then you also keep the water long enough so they can hang on and then have that place in their brain for the return next fall, that is, it's not a negative. Let's go with that. Right.
Yeah, and the wet cycles, that's really what highlights that is, with the drought situation, it's really difficult to artificially replicate, what moisture on the landscape can do, and that can be said from the breeding grounds all the way down to wintering grounds. So I'd much rather deal with a compressed growing season, a shortened operational year, and plenty of moisture, hands down, every year.
Yep, and I think a lot of us in the, I think the prairies are dry, but the mid-continent across the Mississippi Flyway, the upper Midwest, the Northeast, the Atlantic Flyway, all the way up through the breeding grounds of Ontario, Quebec, and elsewhere, and then all the way down to Florida, are wet enough for ducks to find good places now. And one of the things we know is that when it is really wetland conditions that are at their prime in wintering areas, migration areas, and the prairies, that we have the best population, but that when those conditions are really good in the migration areas and the wintering areas, but not so hot in the prairies, we still kind of have a moderate population. So all these things interplay. These ducks need to have places to feed. and rest throughout the year, and then they do need the prairies to breed. That stuff's rough right now. The bee pop will be coming out in a little bit. We'll do a special episode on that. I'm going to be in Sweden for a conference, so we're going to see how I can get that all uploaded. But at least at this point, we have that seemingly the plate is set at mid and southern latitudes for ducks to have choices which matter for them, and then the nutrition they need to go back strong.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's just a great point about having all the components of a duck's life history, having moisture in all of those is a beneficial thing. It can't not be.
Yep. And so we're going to roll with that and stay on the positive end of things, Ryan. Appreciate what you're doing as a business person for the folks across the MAV. And I call it the Deep South. You're not quite Deep South. You're kind of in that that boot heel kind of region. God goodness, if I could go back in time and live back in the Boot Heel, Missouri and Mississippi, I would do it all over again. So I'm jealous of where you're at in the heart of duck country, and keep doing what you're doing. And thanks for doing a wetland check-in with us, kind of late summer stuff, and letting folks know where things are at and maybe how to do some, interventions. And actually, I would say what you gave us was more of a it is what it is kind of comment, and, roll with it and make the best of where you're at water-wise. So thanks for being with us, Ryan, and thanks for being a supporter of the FowlWeather Podcast.
Absolutely. I appreciate the phone call today.
Thank you, sir. The Farmland Group is your one-stop shop for real estate brokerage, consulting, management, lending, and appraisal across Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, Louisiana, Georgia, Tennessee, and growing. Contact them today at farmlg.com. Hey, I'm telling you, do not hesitate, because these folks are busy buying, selling, and providing consulting and management strategies that build value into your portfolio on your land. So get in the queue today. Get on their radar. Get on their books. Man, y'all won't be disappointed. Contact the Farmland Group today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com. All right, what a great group of wetland experts. Thanks to Ed, John, and Ryan for taking time out of their busy days to talk to all the great people across Duck Country, USA. Also remember that we are into that part of the year when duck season is on the brain, and our 100th episode of the FowlWeather Podcast is just around the corner. We're looking to do another FowlWeather sweepstakes once again this fall, so get your friends on our social media pages on Instagram and Facebook for the chance to win some great prizes this upcoming duck season. In the coming weeks, the BPOP survey results will also drop, so follow us to get the most up-to-date information. Thanks for listening, and as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.